Let's look at Markus' Kaarma. A shotgun blast shatters a neighborhood in seconds, but some echoes never truly fade. In Missoula, Montana, one April night in 2014 turned a quiet residential street into the center of an international scandal and legal firestorm, and a debate that forced an entire state to ask where self-defense ends and planned violence actually begins. Markus Kaarma was 30, a former firefighter living in a spacious home on Deer Canyon Court with his girlfriend and baby son. To neighbors, he seemed totally unremarkable, just a young father building a life in a growing Montana town. But right beneath that ordinary surface, anger had been simmering for weeks. Intruders kept breaking into his garage. Tools went missing, items disappeared, and the violations felt endless. With every single theft, Kaarma's fury grew. He started telling everyone around him that he was done being a victim. He wanted justice, or maybe something far darker. In late April, after another break-in, Kaarma made a fateful choice. He didn't ask the police to step up patrols. He didn't buy stronger locks or security cameras. Instead, he came up with a plan. He rigged motion sensors inside his garage, aiming them to trip the second someone stepped inside. He left the garage door halfway open, an open invitation, as prosecutors would later argue. Inside, he set out things to lure a thief: a purse, some electronics, small valuables laid out like bait. Then he waited, shotgun loaded and ready. What happened next unfolded in the dark on April 27. Around 1:15 in the morning, those motion sensors finally triggered. Kaarma grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun and stepped out into the dark. He never yelled a warning. He didn't make a sound. He just raised the gun and fired 4 times into the pitch-black garage, shooting blindly into the dark. The explosions shattered the quiet night, sending shockwaves through the entire neighborhood. Inside, 17-year-old Derek Zide collapsed, bleeding heavily from wounds to his arm and head. Derek was a German exchange student from Hamburg, spending his school year in Missoula. By all accounts, he was a bright, curious teenager, incredibly excited to experience American culture. On that specific night, he and a friend were walking through the area when Derek drifted away, drawn to a local teenage trend known back then as garage hopping, where teenagers would sneak into open garages, searching for beer or little trinkets to steal. It was foolish and illegal, but it wasn't violent. Derek was completely unarmed. He posed absolutely no threat. When the police arrived, they found him unconscious, still holding a bag of potato chips. Paramedics rushed Derek to the hospital, but the injuries were simply catastrophic. A single shotgun pellet had struck his temple, causing devastating and immediate brain damage. Despite doctors fighting to save him, the boy was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. Meanwhile, back at his house, Kaarma calmly told investigators he was just protecting his home and family. He pointed to Montana's castle doctrine, a law allowing deadly force to defend an occupied home. To him, the pull of the trigger was justified, but to prosecutors, it looked like murder. As you and I dig deeper, a disturbing pattern emerges. Witnesses soon came forward, describing conversations they had with Kaarma right before the shooting. A local hairstylist remembered him bragging about staying up to ambush intruders. He supposedly told her he was going to end someone's life if they tried trespassing again. Neighbors testified that he had openly talked about baiting a trap in his garage just to shoot whoever walked in. One neighbor even claimed Kaarma printed custom shirts with messages mocking potential thieves. The mounting evidence didn't show a terrified homeowner, but an angry man hunting for a lethal showdown. The shooting sparked immediate fury, especially over in Germany. Derek's death became a global headline, prompting German officials to launch an inquiry and demand real answers. Back in Missoula, the town split apart, with some defending Kaarma's absolute right to protect his own property. Others condemned him, arguing he had crossed the line from self-defense to execution. The justice system moved fast. Kaarma faced deliberate homicide charges, and his trial started in December of that same year. In court, the defense insisted that Kaarma had acted out of genuine fear. They pointed to past break-ins, a helpless newborn at home, and the danger of facing a stranger in the dark. They claimed Montana law shielded his actions, but the prosecution systematically tore down that story. Prosecutors brought forward proof that Kaarma set a trap and bragged about wanting to hurt someone. They showed he shot, without even checking if the person in his garage was actually a threat. This was not self-defense, they argued. but planned violence disguised as home protection. After deliberating, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict of guilty of deliberate homicide. Cheers immediately erupted in the crowded courtroom. Derek's parents, who flew in from Germany for the trial, held each other weeping. The verdict would not bring their son back, but it proved his life mattered and his death was unjustified. In February 2015, Kaarma stood before the judge for sentencing. The courtroom went silent as the judge delivered a sharp rebuke, telling Kaarma he did not protect his home. Instead, he had gone hunting, loading a shotgun not to protect his family, but to hunt down a stranger out of pure anger. The sentence was heavy, 70 years in prison with the chance of parole after 20. Kaarma muttered a brief, cold apology before guards led him away in handcuffs. This high-profile case reshaped debates over self-defense laws across Montana. Legal experts highlighted his conviction as proof that castle doctrine and stand-your-ground laws have limits. A homeowner cannot orchestrate a deadly encounter and then claim protection under those statutes. For Derek's family, the heavy grief remained, but they found comfort knowing the world recognized their son's humanity. Today, Kaarma remains locked up at Montana State Prison, where he continues serving his long sentence. Numerous appeals have been filed and rejected, with the courts consistently upholding his conviction. The garage stands as a quiet reminder of a night when one man's anger shattered two families, forcing a deep reckoning over the true meaning of justice. But in another basement nearby, an even darker horror was about to unfold. A mystery that would redefine violence for the community. Next, we look at Augustus Standing Rock and Tiffany Pierce. Some crimes are so horrific that seasoned investigators struggle to process the scene. In August 2017, Missoula, Montana, became the backdrop for what local police called the most terrifying crime in the city's modern history. It was a double murder so cold and grotesque that it completely shattered the peace of a mountain community known for its quiet safety. Tiffany Pierce was 23, living in a small house on Strand Avenue with her 26-year-old boyfriend, Augustus Standing Rock, and a roommate who never suspected the horror unfolding downstairs. Pierce had a chaotic past, scarred by instability and childhood abuse, yet nothing in her history could explain the extreme violence she was about to join. Meanwhile, Standing Rock carried his own dark delusions, convinced he was dispensing a form of vigilante justice. Together, they committed crimes that defied all human comprehension. The nightmare began when Standing Rock became convinced that 24-year-old Jackson Wiles had harmed a young girl close to him. Whether his suspicion was real or completely delusional remains mystery. But Standing Rock decided to take matters into his own hands. He lured Wiles to Pierce's house with a lie, leading him down into the basement, where he suddenly attacked, using a heavy knife to inflict fatal wounds on Wiles. In a horrific display of savagery, he then handed the blood-soaked blade directly to Pierce. Upstairs, 15-year-old Marilyn Pickett realized the danger and tried desperately to escape the nightmare unfolding around her. But Pierce blocked her escape. Testimony later revealed Pierce used the knife Standing Rock had given her to kill Marilyn as she tried to flee. The teen's screams echoed through the house, waking a roommate who walked out to find Pierce and Standing Rock drenched in blood. Frozen in absolute shock, he didn't call the police right away. It was a choice that would haunt him forever. What happened next dragged this crime from a double murder into something far more sinister. Instead of fleeing or trying to hide the evidence quietly, Pierce and Standing Rock began a calculated effort to erase every single trace of their victim. Pierce had purchased large plastic tubs and industrial chemicals, along with cleaning supplies, showing clear premeditation. They systematically dismembered both victims, cutting up the bodies before packing them into the containers. Then, they poured in acid and harsh chemicals designed to completely dissolve human tissue. For days, the remains rotted in that basement chemical bath, while normal life continued upstairs as if nothing had happened. Eventually, Pierce confessed to her roommate exactly what she and Standing Rock had done. Finally grasping the sheer horror of the situation, the roommate fled the house and called the police. When police arrived at the Strand Avenue home with a warrant on August 17th, they had no idea what they were about to walk into. Officers slipped inside cautiously, finding Pierce and Standing Rock still there. Standing Rock had a bloody cloth around his hand and initially aimed a gun before obeying commands to surrender. Both were quickly taken into custody. But when detectives stepped into that basement, they found a nightmare worse than anything they had ever seen. Dismembered, partially dissolved bodies floated in tubs of corrosive chemicals, completely filling the grim space. Blood and tissue-covered tools were scattered all over the room. Knives and an axe carried the grim proof of the violence. The coroner's office faced an unprecedented nightmare. The bodies were so badly decomposed that visual identification was completely impossible. Forensic teams had to use dental records and DNA testing to confirm who the victims were. When the families were finally told, the news absolutely crushed them. Marilyn Pickett's relatives couldn't wrap their heads around how a child got caught up in such horror. Jackson Wiles's loved ones mourned a young man who died in absolute terror. As the case entered the court system, new details came to light. Detectives soon discovered that weeks before this double murder, Pierce was involved in a violent home invasion and stabbing on Montana Street, brutally attacking a woman there. Though the victim survived, she was left with deep physical and emotional scars. The pattern of violence was clear, yet Pierce stayed free, escalating her crimes until that fateful August day. The legal battle was incredibly tense. At first, both suspects pleaded not guilty, and separate trials were set up. But in December 2018, Standing Rock made a shocking choice. He pled guilty to deliberate homicide and accountability to deliberate homicide, confessing that he had attacked Wiles and passed the deadly knife to Pierce. In court, when asked if Marilyn was free to run, Standing Rock answered chillingly, "She tried." His plea deal came with a recommendation for life with parole, and he agreed to testify against Pierce. Pierce fought much longer. Her lawyers tried to paint her as a mere victim of her rough circumstances, a woman broken by trauma and abuse, manipulated into committing crimes she didn't fully understand. But in March 2019, facing absolute proof and Standing Rock's upcoming testimony, she also changed her plea. She pleaded guilty to attempted deliberate homicide and accountability to deliberate homicide. On April 12, 2019, the Missoula courtroom packed in grieving family members, community advocates, and reporters. Judge James Wheelis issued a strict warning before the hearing started. Anyone who caused a scene would face contempt charges and go straight to jail. The heavy silence in the courtroom was almost suffocating. Heartbreaking statements from the Wiles family left jurors and spectators weeping in their seats, while Pickett's sister praised the first responders for braving that horrific scene. As the final sentencing approached, Judge Wheelis made his core priorities clear. He declared that public safety was paramount. The judge handed both defendants 2 concurrent life sentences, allowing them to serve their terms simultaneously instead of back-to-back, but with hope of parole decades later. His final message was unmistakable. These men posed far too much danger to ever walk free among normal people again. Today, both Standing Rock and Pierce remain locked away in Montana's state prison. Their names are forever tied to one of the state's darkest chapters, forcing harsh debates about mental health, vigilante justice, and how society must defend vulnerable citizens from predators willing to commit unspeakable crimes. For the grieving families of Marilyn Pickett and Jackson Wiles, no prison sentence could ever restore what they lost. Yet the guilty verdicts brought some justice to a deeply incomprehensible tragedy. But even as Missoula processed this nightmare, another story, one involving a beloved local teacher and a town's shattered innocence, was beginning in the Eastern Plains. Case 3, Michael Spell and Lester Van Waters. Some places are so tiny that everyone knows their neighbor's face. Sidney, Montana, with a population hovering around 5,000, was exactly that kind of town. A quiet, tight-knit community where families left front doors unlocked and keys sitting right in the ignition. Violent crime was virtually unheard of. Neighbors truly trusted one another. Then, on a freezing January morning in 2012, that trust shattered when one of Sydney's most beloved citizens vanished without a trace. Sherry Arnold was 43 years old, a passionate math teacher at Sydney High, a devoted mother of 2, and a pillar of the local community. Having taught in the local schools for years, she touched the lives of countless families. Former students always spoke of her with deep, genuine affection, remembering a woman who made math fun and actually cared about every single student's success. On Saturday, January 7th, Sherry headed out for her morning run around 6:30, taking a route she had run hundreds of times. She never returned. When Gary Arnold realized his wife was late, he figured she had just run a bit further or paused to chat with a neighbor. But as hours slowly ticked by, worry turned to absolute panic. He called the police, and before long, a massive search effort was launched. Hundreds of local volunteers swarmed the area, searching through open fields, streets, and empty land. The National Guard was called in, coordinating search teams across a massive 1,700 square mile grid. Near an irrigation ditch along her usual path, searchers discovered one of her running shoes, a chilling sign of a struggle. Days dragged on with absolutely no sign of her. The town rallied together, holding emotional vigils while missing person flyers filled every single shop window. Counselors flooded Sydney High School to help devastated students process the painful uncertainty. Sherry's family went on local television, begging for any information, unable to comprehend why anyone would target such a gentle soul. The search pressed on, but hope was slipping away. Then, on January 13th, investigators announced a grim update. They had detained 2 men regarding her disappearance and confirmed the devastating news that Sherry was dead. The suspects were 22-year-old Michael Keith Spell and 47-year-old Lester Van Waters Jr., both from Colorado. The pair had traveled north to Sydney, hunting for jobs in Montana's booming back-in oil fields, an oil boom that had drawn thousands of hopeful outsiders to the northern plains in search of fast cash. While most came seeking honest work and a fresh start, Spell and Waters carried something far darker. According to prosecutors, the 2 men had been heavily abusing drugs throughout their entire road trip north. On that freezing January morning, they spotted Sherry running all alone near the canal close to her home. Spell jumped out to grab her, triggering a desperate, violent struggle. Sherry fought for her life. Defensive wounds would later prove her struggle, but her attacker ultimately overpowered her. Prosecutors believe she was strangled or suffocated during the struggle. Her body was driven across state lines and buried in a shallow, rural grave near Williston, North Dakota, about 50 miles from Sydney. For more than 2 months, Sherry's remains lay hidden as her family and neighbors endured agonizing uncertainty. Finally, on March 21st, search parties located the grave. This tragic discovery crushed all hope. But as we will see, it brought answers they desperately needed. Forensic tests and dental records soon confirmed the body was indeed Sherry Arnold. The entire town of Sydney mourned, packing the high school gym for her memorial. But as the legal process began, complications arose. Spell's defense lawyers argued that their client suffered from severe mental limitations. Psychological tests suggested his IQ was around 70, meaning he functioned like an 11-year-old. They described him as functionally illiterate, unable to read or write beyond a basic level. His lawyers fought to have him declared mentally unfit to stand trial, claiming he could not understand his actions or help with his defense. But the state presented a very different picture. They pointed to evidence showing Spell was highly capable of manipulation and strategic planning when it benefited him. Employees at the Montana State Hospital, where they evaluated him, reported several times where Spell tried to trick his doctors, intentionally failing intelligence tests to help his case, while showing sharp focus on things he liked, like video games. Forensic experts suspected he was malingering, basically, faking his symptoms to escape the law. The state's case against Waters went much faster. In exchange for pointing to Sherry's grave and testifying against Spell, Waters accepted a plea bargain. In late 2013, he pleaded guilty to complicity in the murder. At his December 2014 sentencing, Waters looked at Sherry's family and told them he was sorry for their loss. But Sherry's husband, Gary Arnold, made it clear that those words changed nothing. "Time has not made the pain any easier," he said. "It just made life different." Judge Richard Simonton sentenced Waters to 80 years behind bars, suspending another 20 years. The killer would have to serve at least 20 years before seeking parole. The judge noted that even if Waters did not personally end Sherry's life, he set the entire tragedy in motion and shared total responsibility. Spell's trial dragged on much longer. Following long, intense battles over his mental capacity, the court ruled he was fit for trial. To escape a potential death sentence, Spell took a plea deal in October 2014. He admitted to deliberate murder, confessing that while high on drugs, he grabbed Sherry on her run and held her face in muddy water until she suffocated and died. The bargain saved him from execution, but guaranteed decades locked away in prison. In April 2015, Spell appeared before Judge Simonton for sentencing. Her family, friends, and old students packed the gallery alongside locals who had waited years for justice. The judge gave him 100 years, with a chance at parole after 22 years. Gary Arnold felt relieved that this chapter was closed, though he knew no prison sentence could ever bring his wife back. But the pain in Sydney reached far beyond that courtroom. The recent oil boom brought money, but also thousands of strangers, chaotic traffic, and a fear the town had never felt before. After Sherry was taken, neighbors started locking their doors and cars. Parents refused to let their kids out of their sight. The trust that once defined the town was gone, replaced by a fear of the unknown. And as you and I will discover, Spell's story was not over. In April 2016, while locked up in state prison, he faced new charges for allegedly trying to murder another inmate. Court records show Spell and another inmate plotted to murder a third prisoner after a bitter verbal dispute. Spell put the victim in a tight chokehold while his partner beat him with a weapon, leaving him for dead. The inmate miraculously survived, and Spell hit new charges that guaranteed he would never walk out of prison. Today, both Spell and Waters remain behind bars. Their names are forever tied to Montana's most tragic crime. Sherry Arnold's legacy lives on in her students, her loving family, and a town that refuses to forget her. But as Sydney slowly healed from that nightmare, another darkness was brewing in Great Falls, a predator whose crimes were even more horrific, with secrets that would take decades to uncover. Case 4. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. The human mind holds dark corners that most of us can never fully comprehend, hidden chambers where evil festers quietly, until something monstrous drags it into the light. In Great Falls, Montana, during the mid-1990s, that monster walked among normal families, hiding behind a warm smile and a helping hand. But when 10-year-old Zachary Ramsey vanished walking to school on a freezing February morning, police would soon uncover secrets so horrific, the whole town wondered how such evil could hide in plain sight. Nathaniel Bar-Jonah did not always use that name. Born David Paul Brown in Worcester, Massachusetts. In 1957, his dark behavior surfaced early. At age 7, he got a Ouija board for his birthday, using it to lure a 5-year-old girl to his basement and choke her. Only his mother walking in saved the young girl's life. As he grew up, his violence only escalated. By his teens, local police knew his name all too well. He was a dangerous predator, driven by an obsession that would define his entire life. In 1977, at age 20, he committed crimes that should have locked him away forever. He abducted 2 young boys, forced them into costumes, took photographs, and subjected them to unspeakable horrors. Sentenced to psychiatric treatment after his conviction, he spent nearly 11 years inside Bridgewater State Hospital. There, therapists wrote down his chilling confessions of dark fantasies involving violence and eating human remains. Yet despite those terrifying warnings, a judge ruled in 1991 that Bar-Jonah was no longer a threat. They let him go. Just days after gaining his freedom, Bar-Jonah struck again. He targeted a 7-year-old boy waiting in a car outside an Oxford, Massachusetts post office. The assault brought only probation, but instead of facing the law, he ran west. He legally changed his name to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah, claiming he wanted to experience firsthand the kind of persecution Jewish people had historically endured. By the time Montana police realized a dangerous offender had slipped into their community, it was already too late. He arrived in Great Falls in 1991, moving in with his mother and blending right into the neighborhood. Weighing over 300 pounds, he seemed deeply intimidating, but local neighbors found him incredibly helpful and friendly. He volunteered at local schools, offered to babysit children, and hosted neighborhood barbecues, serving mystery meals to unsuspecting guests. His dark past remained a secret. Montana had no registry back then, and Massachusetts authorities never tracked him down to ensure he was actually checking in with local officers. February 6, 1996, started like any other freezing winter morning. Zachary Ramsey, a cheerful 10-year-old, stepped out of his apartment on the 400 block of North 4th Street around 7:30, heading for school. Moments later, a witness saw him walk into an alley near North 5th Street. He never made it to class. When the school finally called his mother that afternoon, sheer panic took over. The boy had run off once before, just a month earlier, but he had called home within the hour. This time, the silence was absolute. Great Falls simply was not used to nightmares like this. Locals banded together, forming massive search teams to scour neighborhoods, empty fields, and nearby terrain. But days bled into weeks, leaving no trace of the missing boy. Then came a potential break. A neighbor recalled spotting Bar-Jonah in the alley right when Zachary vanished. A second witness reported a crying child trailed by an angry man near North 6th Street that morning. Detective Bill Belushi, lead investigator on the case, pushed for a search warrant of Bar-Jonah's home, but was rejected for lack of evidence. Soon after, Bar-Jonah packed up and left his mother's place. Years passed, and the case went cold. While Zachary's mother clung to hope that her boy was alive, detectives never stopped suspecting Bar-Jonah. In December 1999, police finally got the critical break they needed. Bar-Jonah was seen lingering near an elementary school for the third time that week, clad in a dark jacket and knit cap, armed with pepper spray, a fake gun, and a counterfeit police badge. This single slip-up gave authorities grounds to act. When investigators finally raided Bar-Jonah's home, the horrors they found there defied all human belief. Albums showing unconscious boys, heavy ropes, and binding gear were scattered throughout the apartment. But the most horrifying discovery lay in his encrypted journals. These were page after page of codes that took the FBI months to crack. Once the code was finally broken, the sick contents turned their stomachs. The notebooks detailed torture, dismemberment, and acts too horrific to describe. He wrote about little boy stew, Zachary burgers, and little boy pot pies, detailing exactly how to prep and cook human remains. Then, investigators found the recipe, handwritten steps that seemed to explain how to destroy bodies by eating them. Financial records revealed that despite Bar-Jonah's enormous size and endless hunger, he made barely any grocery runs in the month after Zachary vanished. Then, authorities dug into the dirt floor of Bar-Jonah's garage, unearthing 21 bone fragments. Forensic tests proved the remains belonged to a teenager, but the bones were cut, crushed, and boiled treatment that destroyed any chance of a DNA match. Detectives were sure they had found Zachary's body, but proving it was impossible. In July 2000, prosecutors charged Bar-Jonah with Zachary's kidnapping and murder, along with assaulting 3 other Great Falls boys. The entire town reacted with pure horror and outrage. Neighbors who had attended Bar-Jonah's backyard cookouts wondered if the sickening rumors were actually true. Had they eaten something truly unspeakable? Mothers who once trusted him around their kids felt deeply betrayed and violated. Heavy media coverage forced the trial to move to Butte, starting in February 2002. In court, prosecutors laid out crushing evidence of Bar-Jonah's crimes against the other 3 boys, including kidnapping, brutal assault, and unspeakable cruelty. Witnesses testified that he hung one young victim from a ceiling pulley, playing with ropes in a way that nearly killed him. Jurors were shown photo albums containing thousands of pictures of children, including his young victims. But the case for Zachary suddenly hit a major roadblock. Zachary's own mother, influenced by the defense, testified that she believed her boy was still alive. She claimed she saw video of a child in Italy who looked just like Zachary, though police proved it was someone else. Still, her words planted enough doubt about whether a murder had even taken place. With no physical body and no solid DNA match, prosecutors had to drop the charges for Zachary. Yet, justice found another way. The jury found Bar-Jonah guilty of kidnapping, assault, and several charges involving the other 3 boys. The state labeled him a level 3 offender, the most dangerous rating possible, ruling that any hope of rehabilitation was completely dead. The judge handed down a sentence of 130 years without parole, ensuring he would never walk free again. Bar-Jonah kept protesting his innocence until the very end, claiming he was framed and that young Zachary would turn up alive. But in April 2008, guards at the Montana State Prison found him unresponsive in his cell. He was rushed to a hospital, where he was pronounced dead at age 51. The official cause was heart disease. His extreme weight and failing health had finally caught up to him. Zachary Ramsey's case still remains unsolved, though detectives and locals believe they know exactly what happened to him. In 2011, despite his mother's protests, a judge declared Zachary legally dead, bringing a small piece of closure to his father and family. The boy who vanished on his walk to school became a tragic symbol of stolen innocence, a chilling reminder that monsters do not always look like monsters. Bar-Jonah's case exposed deep, catastrophic failures inside the justice system. A known predator was released despite urgent warnings, free to cross state lines completely unsupervised, leaving him free to hunt for years before anyone finally stopped him. His crimes sparked national debates about sex offender registries and how different police departments share crucial information. Today, the town of Great Falls remembers Zachary not as a victim of bureaucratic neglect, but as a little boy who deserved so much more protection. But as one predator's story ended in a cell, we find another drifter already crossing state lines, carving a trail of violence that would eventually draw investigators right back to Montana. Case 5. Ronald James Ward. Some people wander through life, never truly finding where they belong, shifting from town to town, job to job, and relationship to relationship, constantly chasing something they can never quite reach. Ronald James Ward Jr. was exactly that kind of drifter. Born in Hood River, Oregon, in 1966, he dreamed of working as a commercial fisherman, a quiet, honest life, dictated only by the ocean waves and changing seasons. Instead, his life spiraled into a dark pattern of drug abuse, shattered relationships, and finally, a 4-month stretch in the year 2000, where he morphed from a simple vagrant into a cross-country serial killer. Ward grew up in chaos. His father, a violent, unfaithful man, divorced his mother after passing on an illness he had contracted while cheating. Ward later claimed he had 8 different stepmothers throughout his childhood, a non-stop revolving door of parents that left him completely without any stability or guidance. He dropped out of school in the 6th grade and married young at 19 to a woman named Donna, who already had 6 kids. Surprisingly, Ward was genuinely good to those stepchildren, taking them on outings and walks that he had never been able to enjoy with his own father. For a brief moment, it looked like he might break his family's toxic cycle. But Donna ultimately walked out with the kids, and Ward completely spiraled out of control. Hard drugs became his only comfort: cocaine, heroin, and moonshine, anything to block out the void. He survived on odd jobs, driving trucks, building houses, and commercial fishing. Working on fishing boats in Alaska brought brief happiness, a small taste of the dream he once held. But that work was strictly seasonal. When winter hit, he drifted back to the mainland, looking for any job he could find. In 1999, Ward met Hattie Ann Baker at a shelter in Missoula, Montana. It was a local homeless shelter. Baker was a desperate mother of 3, deserted by her husband, and fighting just to survive. The two quickly bonded and relocated to West Virginia, hoping to get Baker closer to her family. Ward landed a job driving a garbage truck, and for a short time, things felt stable. But in the summer of 2000, Ward traveled back to Montana to see his mother, only to discover that Baker had been cheating on him. This betrayal unlocked a dark rage inside him. It was a fury that would fuel the horror to come. On August 25, 2000, a young woman from Scotch Plains, New Jersey, was driving her 1972 Volkswagen van across the country with her dogs, Winter and Sativa. She was heading for Eureka, California, where she had just taken a job at a local alternative preschool. Adventurous and experienced, Kristen had traveled all over and knew exactly how to take care of herself on road trips. But when she pulled into a highway rest stop along Interstate 40 near Morrilton, Arkansas, to let her dogs stretch and cool down her overheating engine, fate pushed her straight into the path of a monster. Ward, blindingly angry and high on moonshine, cocaine, and heroin, had fled West Virginia in a stolen garbage truck, claiming he was headed back to Montana. While drifting through Arkansas, he noticed Kristen at a rest area. What followed was pure, senseless brutality. Ward ambushed her, beating and choking her before plunging a knife into her neck 10 times. He left her body behind the building, discarding her dress nearby. The following morning, truck drivers spotted her loose dog and used the collar tag to call her family. Those loyal pets guided state troopers straight to Kristen's hidden remains. Detectives carefully gathered biological evidence from the crime scene, testing an abandoned beer can and cigarette pack for DNA. They uploaded the profile, but with no matches, the trail went cold. Meanwhile, Ward continued his lethal journey westward. By late October 2000, Ward rolled into Hamilton, Montana. There, he befriended 43-year-old Craig Petrick at an RV park, borrowing Petrick's single-shot rifle under the guise of needing protection. Instead, he turned that very weapon on Petrick. He bludgeoned him with a stone, shot him 3 times, and concealed his body deep in the Sapphire Mountains. After pawning the rifle in Billings, he bolted toward California with his girlfriend. Arriving in Modesto, California, Ward crossed paths with Sheila Pauley, a 32-year-old homeless mother of 3 trying to rebuild her life. She had just passed nursing assistant exams in Las Vegas, hoping to soon share custody of her kids with her ex-husband. Instead, Ward ambushed her in a horrifying rerun of his previous attacks, beating and stabbing her before hiding her body under dry leaves in Modesto's Dry Creek. Days later, in Merced, California, Ward targeted 49-year-old Jackie Travis. Her horrific end mirrored the rest: beaten, strangled, mutilated, burned, and stabbed right inside her own home. By early December, this predator had stolen 4 lives in 4 months across 3 different states. His run ended in January 2001, when police in Merced caught him on a Montana warrant for Petrick's murder. Extradited to Montana, Ward confessed to the killing, claiming Petrick had assaulted his girlfriend, and she told him, "You'd better end him, or I will." In June 2001, Ward pleaded guilty, receiving a life sentence with a chance of parole in 2033. For years, Ward remained behind bars in Montana, while detectives in other states kept digging into their cold cases. In 2007, DNA testing gave detectives the break they needed. DNA from Kristen's crime scene directly matched Ward's profile in the national database. Suddenly, the puzzle was solved. A traveling monster who preyed on defenseless women. Ward was sent to Arkansas, where he pleaded no contest to Kristen's murder. In court, he claimed he blacked out from drinking and could not recall the attack, but accepted blame because of the DNA. He was handed another life term. Soon after, California prosecutors linked him through DNA to the murders of Pauley and Travis. Ward pleaded guilty, getting extra life sentences. Legendary FB1 profiler John Douglas, famous for chasing serial killers, flatly rejected Ward's claims of being a peaceful man pushed to temporary madness by drugs and grief. The expert pointed out that his pattern, specifically choosing defenseless targets, showed he was a predator who hunted his victims. Douglas warned there could be many more victims from Ward's decades of drifting, whom police had never identified. On April 11, 2014, prison guards in Montana found Ward cold and unresponsive in his cell. He was rushed to a nearby hospital and pronounced dead at the age of 48. Officials declared his death unexpected, but ruled out foul play. Though an autopsy was done, the results were never shared with the public. Ronald Ward died exactly how he lived, a lone drifter who left nothing but misery and mystery behind. 4 confirmed victims, likely many more. 4 shattered families left to pick up the pieces, destroyed by an angry man who refused to face what he had done. Today, his name remains a dark footnote in Montana's criminal history. He serves as a grim reminder that violence can strike anywhere, brought by those who wander without conscience. But while Ward's victims died far from home, another tragedy was already unfolding in Idaho. A horror that would cross into Montana's wilderness, testing the limits of human depravity. Case 6. Joseph Edward Duncan. Some crimes are so monstrous that even seasoned detectives struggle to keep their composure when discussing them. In May 2005, one such crime shattered a quiet family in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, sending shockwaves straight into the Montana wilderness, where unspeakable acts occurred in total darkness. What started as a home invasion in a quiet neighborhood became one of the most disturbing cases in Northwest history. A nightmare of stolen innocence, ruined lives, and an evil captured only through a miracle that saved one child. Joseph Edward Duncan III was born in Tacoma, Washington, in 1963. His criminal path started early. At just age 16, he was convicted of assaulting a younger boy. By his 20s, authorities recognized him as a repeat offender with a rapidly escalating pattern of violence. He served time in various prisons but was repeatedly released, despite urgent warnings from psychologists that he was an extreme danger to children. By 2005, Duncan was in his early 40s, a registered offender who had violated parole and was living as a fugitive, dodging the law across state lines. The Groene family lived in a home near Coeur d'Alene, surrounded by the quiet beauty of northern Idaho. Brenda Groene, age 40, lived with her boyfriend Mark McKenzie, who was 37, along with 3 of her kids, 13-year-old Slade, 9-year-old Dylan, and 8-year-old Shasta. They were a close, loving family, just living their lives. But on the night of May 16, 2005, Duncan targeted them. Slipping in under cover of darkness, Duncan broke into their house armed with a hammer, unleashing a wave of unimaginable brutality. He brutally attacked Brenda, Mark, and Slade. The younger children, Dylan and Shasta, woke up to find their family being destroyed right before their eyes. Then, Duncan kidnapped both children, tying them up and throwing them into his car. He drove deep into Montana's Lolo National Forest, to a remote camp he had prepared. For 6 weeks, Dylan and Shasta endured unspeakable horrors that no child should ever face. Duncan subjected them to relentless abuse in that lonely wilderness, miles away from any hope of rescue. He even documented his crimes, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would later seal his fate, while standing as a chilling record of his depravity. Dylan bravely tried to shield his sister as things grew more desperate, but the killer's violence eventually took the young boy's life too. After hiding Dylan's body in the woods, Duncan left young Shasta as the only surviving witness to his monstrous crimes. Back in Idaho, the horrific scene at the Groene home sent local law enforcement into an absolute frenzy. 3 people were dead, and 2 young children were completely missing. Detectives worked tirelessly around the clock, chasing down every single lead. Amber alerts went out. Search parties combed the woods, while nationwide media coverage flashed the children's faces on every screen. But weeks slipped by with no breakthroughs, and hope began to fade. Then, on July 2, 2005, a miracle happened at a Denny's diner in Coeur d'Alene. An alert waitress spotted one of the missing children from the news broadcasts. It was 8-year-old Shasta Groene, sitting with an older man, and the waitress quietly called the police. Officers rushed to the scene, arresting Duncan on the spot, finally rescuing Shasta and ending her 47-day nightmare. Her brave testimony later gave investigators the vital proof they needed. She detailed everything: the home invasion, the brutal murders of her family, the kidnapping, the remote Montana camp, and her brother Dylan's tragic fate. Search teams found Dylan's remains in the Lolo National Forest, exactly where Shasta said they were. The trial became a massive spectacle, with prosecutors presenting overwhelming evidence. This included his own recorded confessions, forensic proof linking him to the crimes, and Shasta's incredibly brave testimony. Duncan's defense team tried to argue he was mentally ill, but the cold planning and calculated preparation proved otherwise. The way he chose his victims and hid his tracks proved he knew exactly what he was doing. In August 2008, a federal jury convicted Duncan on multiple charges, including kidnapping and murder. He received the death penalty 3 separate sentences, ensuring he would face execution for his crimes. An Idaho court also found him guilty, handing down even more life sentences. Legal experts called it one of the most obvious cases for the death penalty in modern history. But Duncan would never actually make it to the execution chamber. Years dragged on as his appeals wound through the system. Sitting on death row, he gave occasional interviews filled with contradictory messages, sometimes acting truly remorseful, and other times clearly soaking up the attention his crimes brought him. Detectives linked him to other unsolved missing children cases across several states, though no official charges were ever filed. On March 28, 2021, Duncan died while in federal custody. He was 58 years old, killed by a fast-moving brain cancer, diagnosed just months before. His death brought very mixed reactions. For the Groene family, it offered a small sense of closure. He would never speak publicly again, never do interviews, and never have another chance to hurt anyone. But it also meant he escaped the execution a jury wanted. Meanwhile, Shasta Groene, the sole survivor, grew up far from the public eye. Over the years, she has occasionally shared her story, championing child safety and standing up for other victims of violence. Her incredible bravery, both in surviving and testifying, made sure this monster could never hurt another soul. His family remembers young Dylan Groene as a fiercely protective older brother who tried to shield his sister to the very end. The tragedy completely changed how police departments across Idaho, Montana, and Washington worked together when cases crossed state borders. It exposed massive holes in how high-risk criminals were tracked, leading to much tighter supervision laws. Duncan's name soon became synonymous with the absolute worst kind of predator, a predator who targeted families, planned his attacks in detail, and never felt any real remorse. Today, the Lolo National Forest remains a place of stunning beauty, but also a quiet reminder of how easily darkness can shatter peace. Yet stands as a testament to one little girl's survival and the relentless detectives who refuse to give up. Even though the scars of his cruelty may never fully heal, Shasta's incredible strength proves that even after the worst nightmares, hope and life can still find a way forward. Meanwhile, back in Montana's quiet towns, where people thought such horrors only happened in the news, another mystery was quietly brewing. This next mystery would take almost 20 years to unravel, proving that real justice is never truly out of reach. Case 7. Zachary O'Neill. Cold cases haunt detectives in ways that active investigations never can. Unresolved cases gather dust in the files, while families desperately wait for answers that might never come. In Laurel, Montana, one cold case haunted the community for 19 years. A young woman's life was stolen during a routine shift at work. A ruthless killer slipped into the night, while a mother refused to let her daughter's memory fade away. Yet sometimes, justice comes from the most unexpected places, and a confession for one crime can unlock the truth of another. November 15th, 1998, started like any autumn evening in the small town of Laurel. Miranda Fenner, only 18 years old, was working the late shift alone at the local video rental shop where neighbors came to pick out movies for the weekend. She was known for her quick smile and kind personality, exactly the kind of person who made everyone feel welcome. That night, she was doing her usual closing chores, putting away tapes and tidying shelves. But around 8:15, a passing driver noticed something was wrong. The shop's front door stood slightly open, and someone was crawling flat on the pavement outside. The driver ran to help and discovered it was Miranda. She was clinging to life after a brutal attack. The killer had stabbed her repeatedly in the head and neck, then slashed her throat. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, but the damage was simply too severe. Miranda died, leaving behind shattered parents and grieving friends, and a small town struggling to comprehend how such violence hit their quiet streets. Police launched a massive investigation. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. The register was open, and the struggle seemed frantic and sudden. Yet, leads were scarce. No witnesses saw anyone near the store during those critical moments, and early forensics offered very little to go on. Detectives questioned anyone who had been near the scene, ran background checks on local offenders, and chased down every lead. But years passed without a suspect, leaving Miranda without justice. The trail went cold, but Miranda's mother, Sherry Fenner, refused to let her daughter be forgotten. She fought hard for victims' rights, working to spare other families the endless grief of a cold case. Her efforts eventually helped pass Marsy's Law in Montana in 2015, an amendment that guaranteed basic rights to victims and their loved ones. Sherry even took to national television, sharing her story on major programs, desperately hoping a viewer might remember a vital piece of the puzzle. Little did police know, the killer was still living right there in Montana, hiding in plain sight for years. Zachary David O'Neill was only in his early 20s when he took her life. He already had dark impulses, but police had no reason to suspect him. He went about his life carrying the dark secret of that November night, confident his crime would never be uncovered. In September 1998, just 2 months before Miranda was targeted, another brutal assault occurred in Billings. A woman delivering newspapers in the dark early morning was violently attacked and left to die. She miraculously survived, but the investigation stalled, haunting detectives in the exact same way. Then, in March 2017, detectives brought O'Neill in to ask about that paper route attack. As they pushed for answers, the interrogation took an unexpected turn. O'Neill started offering up details about other dark deeds he had committed. He confessed to the 1998 assault and then admitted to breaking into the Laurel video store in November of that very same year. He told detectives he had walked into the store intending to rob the place. Miranda was working entirely alone, an easy target for someone looking for quick cash. But the robbery quickly spiraled out of control. He admitted to cornering her with a hunting knife, inflicting the fatal wounds. After running from the store, he drove to Jordan, Montana, and threw away the weapon, convinced he had gotten away with murder. For nearly 20 years, he carried that dark truth while a family suffered in silence. His confession finally brought the answers her mother had spent decades fighting for. But it also raised a haunting question. How many other cold cases could have been solved sooner? Were there other victims during his 19 years of walking free? Once they had his confession, prosecutors moved incredibly fast. They charged him with murder and attempted murder. The case was solid, backed by details only the killer himself could possibly have known, along with old forensic evidence that finally made perfect sense. On July 22, 2019, O'Neill stood in court and pleaded guilty. This spared the grieving families from enduring a painful trial, while ensuring he could never try to claim innocence. That August, he stood before a judge to learn his fate. The courtroom packed in with people whose lives Miranda had touched, citizens who had waited 19 years to see justice served. The judge handed down 3 life sentences, offering parole only after 30 years. While the sentences ran concurrently instead of back-to-back, a 30-year minimum ensured O'Neill would spend decades locked away behind bars. For Sherry Fenner, the long-awaited sentence brought mixed emotions, relief that justice had finally arrived, but also deep sorrow that it took decades, knowing no punishment could ever balance the scales of justice. Miranda Fenner's legacy reaches far beyond the horrific crime that claimed her life. Driven by her mother's fight, Marcy's Law now protects victims across Montana, guaranteeing them rights to information, notifications, and active participation in the legal process. The video rental store, where Miranda worked, has long since closed, replaced by modern streaming and new technology, yet her memory stays alive in the community that loved her. Zachary O'Neill is currently serving his time inside Montana's state prison, where he will stay for the foreseeable future. His confession brought needed closure to 2 grieving families, solving 2 cold cases that haunted Yellowstone County for nearly 20 years. For detectives, it served as a powerful reminder that cold cases are never truly dead, that breakthroughs often rise from unexpected places, and that decades of persistence can eventually uncover the truth. Today, when locals in Laurel look back on November 1998, they remember more than just tragedy. They recall Miranda's warm smile, her kindness to strangers, and the mother who refused to let her child become another forgotten statistic. They remember that justice can still arrive, even when delayed, and that in the darkest of cold cases, hope must never be abandoned. Yet, just as one cold case closed, a new horror erupted in real time, caught on camera for the world to see. It was a grim reminder that the most dangerous moments can unfold in places we assume are completely safe. Case 8. Craig Benson. Security cameras watch over modern America, monitoring gas stations, convenience stores, restaurants, and local bars. They record everyday life, people laughing, ordering drinks, and scrolling on their phones. Most of this footage is quickly erased, deemed totally useless and forgotten. But occasionally, those lenses record something impossible to forget. A sudden, violent act that becomes chilling proof of how fast rage can spiral into absolute tragedy. On a late summer night in 2023, surveillance cameras in a quiet Montana bar captured that exact horror, recording every second of a double murder that shook the small town of Superior. The Four Aces bar sat quietly along Mullen Road in Superior, a mountain town of fewer than 900 residents in rural Mineral County. It was a neighborhood spot where locals gathered after work, knowing everyone else's name and all of their business. On August 27, 2023, the tavern was busy as usual, with quiet chatter, low laughter, and bartenders serving loyal regulars who had been coming there for years. Logan Gardner, 43 years old, worked behind the bar that night, pouring drinks and making small talk. Sitting together at the bar were Jenny and Craig Benson, married for 22 years. To anyone watching, they looked completely normal. The Bensons looked like just another ordinary couple enjoying drinks on a Sunday night. But beneath the happy surface, their marriage was falling apart. Future court testimony would expose rumors of cheating, emotional distance, and a growing anger that Craig could no longer hide. Around 9:20 that night, Craig got up from his stool and walked out to his Chevrolet Tahoe in the parking lot. Security footage captured his every move, his calm attitude, and deliberate steps. He grabbed something from the SUV, walked back inside, and sat right back down beside his wife. What followed took mere seconds, but those frames would play on loop in courtrooms and news stations nationwide. The chilling video showed Craig reaching into his waistband and pulling out a loaded handgun. With zero warning, he raised the weapon and shot Jenny in the head at point-blank range. She collapsed instantly. Logan Gardner, the bartender working nearby, bravely tried to step in and stop him. Craig instantly spun the gun and fired several rounds, hitting the bartender multiple times. Gardner collapsed behind the wooden bar as pure terror erupted throughout the crowded room. Craig set the gun on the bar and walked out. He climbed into his Tahoe and sped west, fleeing into the night, while panicking witnesses inside frantically dialed 911. One customer, showing incredible presence of mind, a witness followed Craig's vehicle, reporting his location to law enforcement in real time. Mineral County Sheriff's deputies wasted no time, immediately broadcasting alerts to all neighboring law enforcement agencies. At around 9:50 that evening, Missoula County deputies spotted the Tahoe near Graves Creek and Petty Creek Road, west of Lolo. They stopped the vehicle and took Craig into custody without a fight. Back at the Four Aces, first responders arrived to find both victims dead. The scene was devastating, with blood and overturned furniture everywhere. Witness faces were pale with shock, having just watched two innocent people lose their lives right in front of them. In a tiny town like Superior, where violent crime was practically non-existent, the shock ran incredibly deep. Jenny Benson was 49 years old, a dedicated mother, a wife, and a beloved friend to many. Logan Gardner left behind a grieving family who described him as kind and hardworking. Neither victim stood a chance to defend themselves. Prosecutors charged Craig with 2 counts of deliberate homicide and using a deadly weapon in a violent crime. His bail was set at $5 million, and he was locked up in the Mineral County Detention Center. As the case progressed, defense lawyers built their strategy, admitting from the start that Craig was indeed the one who pulled the trigger. Security footage made a denial impossible. Instead, they pushed for a conviction of mitigated deliberate homicide, which is a lesser charge used when a defendant acts under extreme mental or emotional distress. The defense claimed that Craig had only just found out about an alleged affair between Jenny and Logan Gardner. They argued this sudden revelation sent him into such a blind rage that he could not think clearly during the shooting. They painted a portrait of a broken man, pushed entirely over the edge by betrayal and rejection. To find an unbiased jury, the trial was moved out of Mineral County and relocated to Hamilton. The trial began in October 2024, with both sides presenting arguments to Judge Leslie Halligan. The prosecution acknowledged that the rumored affair might have actually happened, but insisted it was absolutely no excuse for Craig's violent actions. They highlighted how calculated his actions were, walking out of the bar, grabbing a gun from his truck, walking back inside, and gunning down 2 people in public. That was not a crime of sudden passion, the state argued. It was cold, deliberate murder. Eyewitnesses testified that Craig showed absolutely no hesitation and zero remorse during the attack. He had calmly walked in, carried out the executions, and stepped back outside like he was finishing a chore. On October 23rd, Craig took a gamble and testified in his own defense. He claimed he had no actual memory of the shooting. While he could recall the words Jenny said to him moments before the violence started, he insisted the pull of the trigger was a total blank. Prosecutors pounced on this inconsistency during cross-examination, arguing that selective memory is highly convenient when trying to dodge blame. If his mind remembered the conversation right before the attack, how could he forget the violent act itself? The jury deliberated for several hours before reaching their final decision. On October 25th, they came back with a unanimous verdict, guilty of 2 counts of deliberate homicide and guilty of using a weapon to commit the crimes. Craig was found not guilty on the lesser mitigated homicide charge. The courtroom filled with quiet sobs and heavy gasps, bringing relief to the victims' families but devastating Craig's supporters. He was instantly sent back to jail, his bail revoked, with sentencing set for early January 2025. Leading up to the hearing, both sides compiled emotional victim impact statements and letters of character reference. The sentencing hearing, held on January 3rd in Superior, was incredibly emotional. Jenny's daughters took the stand, sharing the ongoing terror of knowing their own father took their mother's life. Jenny's father, Terry Savage, wept as he spoke of losing his only daughter, his best friend, and his joy. He wished Craig a miserable existence behind bars. Heartbreaking words that captured the deep trauma of a parent who would never see his child again. Logan Gardner's brother, Cody, spoke about the painful void left in their family. Logan was much more than just a bartender. He was a brother, an uncle, a hard worker who always treated others with respect. His life was cut short in a flash of mindless violence, leaving his family to carry a lifelong grief. Craig's sister, Chris Norton, stepped forward to plead for mercy, insisting her brother was no monster and that the violence did not define his true character. She described how the tragedy had torn the family apart, begging the court for understanding. An old friend recalled happier times shared with both Craig and Jenny, calling Craig a devoted husband who woke up daily, determined to build a good life. Soon, Craig himself stood up to speak. He offered a brief apology, but quickly turned on Jenny, accusing her of being unfaithful and dishonest. His cold words drew sharp gasps from the crowded courtroom. State prosecutors objected constantly as he tried to blame the victim for her own fate. Even in his final moments of reckoning, he refused to take real accountability for the horror he caused. His daughter, Paige, called in through video, describing him as a narcissist and admitting she never felt safe with him out there. Judge Halligan weighed the testimony before handing down the penalty. She sentenced Craig to 60 years for each count of deliberate homicide, ordered to run consecutively. The terms would stack up rather than overlap. Additionally, she added a 10-year weapons enhancement to each count, totaling 140 years in Montana State Prison. He will not see parole for 35 years, making him well into his 80s before tasting freedom. The court also ordered him to pay nearly $30,000 in restitution to Cody Gardner. As deputies escorted Craig away in heavy chains, the town of Superior began its long road to recovery. The local Four Aces bar kept its doors open, but the dark memory of that night would haunt it forever. For Jenny's children, Logan's grieving family, and those who saw the bloody attack, the security tape is a chilling, permanent record of lives destroyed in an instant. Craig Benson was just another name in the state's dark history. A husband who picked murder over a clean split, shattering two families and his own future in a flash of blind rage. But as Superior wept, a different family tragedy was brewing in Bozeman, proving that control and manipulation can stretch far beyond prison walls. Case number 9, Joseph Paul DeWise. Abuse does not always show up as black eyes and broken bones. Often, it thrives in the dark, built on quiet terror, toxic head games, constant stalking, and dark promises whispered behind closed doors. Joseph Paul DeWise knew these tactics well, spending years dominating his estranged wife, Lauren, with terror and threats, recording their fights and tracking her every move, making absolutely sure she knew he was lurking. But when she finally gathered the strength to run, taking her kids to start over with a roommate in Belgrade, Montana, DeWise had to choose: let her go or make sure no one else could ever have her. He chose blood, and in a horrific twist for this family, he made a move that would force his own children to testify against him. Joseph Paul DeWise and Lauren Walder had once built a home together, though their marriage was poisoned by slowly building tension. They had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, who saw things no child ever should. By early 2018, Lauren hit her limit. In April of that year, she begged for a restraining order against both DeWise and his father, Scott, who shared their home. A judge signed the order on April 27th, citing serious fears over his explosive and dangerous mood swings. DeWise soon filed for divorce. But by May, both legal cases were dropped as the couple tried to patch things up. It didn't work. By the end of 2017 and into early 2018, Lauren packed up, took the kids, rented a small house in Belgrade with her roommate, Ashley Van Hemert. She was finally getting a fresh start, putting miles between herself and that toxic marriage. But her husband refused to release his grip. Police later found he was secretly tracking her phone and car, watching her every move from afar. He taped their arguments on his phone. He created dozens of videos and audio files, capturing the complete dysfunction of their relationship. On several recordings, his voice made chilling threats about what would happen if Lauren continued her perceived betrayals. On the night of January 6, 2018, DeWise finally put his plan into motion. According to later testimony from his 15-year-old son, Joe, DeWise woke the boy and said they were going for a drive. They drove from Bozeman to Belgrade, a short journey of about 10 miles. DeWise and his son put on knit masks and rubber gloves before approaching the house where Lauren lived with Van Hemert. DeWise kicked open the front door, and they stepped inside. Joe testified that he followed his father upstairs, watching as DeWise moved from room to room with a gun. In one bedroom, DeWise found Ashley Van Hemert and shot her 3 times with a .22 caliber weapon. Gravely injured, Van Hemert collapsed in her room, surrounded by shell casings. In another room, DeWise found Lauren. He fired 4 shots, ending her life in a swift, methodical attack. Afterwards, DeWise and his son fled back to their vehicle and quickly drove away. They stopped at a town pump convenience store on the way back. Security cameras captured DeWise going inside while Joe sat in the car, struggling to breathe and unable to move. The next morning, first responders arrived at the Belgrade home. They found Ashley Van Hemert clinging to life amidst blood and shell casings. In another bedroom, they found Lauren, already dead. It was a horrific scene, showing a targeted attack meant to silence Lauren and eliminate any witnesses. Despite her critical injuries, Van Hemert survived and began the long road to recovery. Her testimony would later prove crucial, and investigators immediately focused on DeWise. His volatile history with Lauren, the recent restraining order, and his documented obsession with tracking her movements made him their prime suspect. Searching his home, detectives found ammunition in his shed that matched the caliber of casings at the crime scene. They also found the murder weapon, a .22 caliber gun tossed into Trout Meadow Pond in Bozeman. A couple walking near the water had discovered it and called the police. Its serial number traced back to Joseph Paul DeWise. But the most devastating evidence came from his own family. His son Joe, though initially hesitant, eventually told investigators the truth about what happened that night. In court, the 17-year-old testified in heartbreaking detail about being forced to go along, watching his father attack 2 women, and the trauma that followed. DeWise's 19-year-old daughter, Natalie, also took the witness stand, revealing that her father had called her from jail, attempting to manipulate her into blaming her younger brother for the murders. Those recorded jailhouse calls were played aloud for the jury, capturing DeWise instructing his daughter to say that Joe, who was only 15 at the time, committed the crimes. He suggested that because Joe was a minor, he would not face serious consequences. The trial in December 2019 lasted 7 days. Prosecutors built an overwhelming case, showing the recovered gun, matching ammunition, recorded phone threats, and store surveillance footage, plus forensic analysis linking DeWise to the scene, alongside testimony from his own children. Ashley Van Hemert took the stand, still healing from her injuries, confronting the man who tried to kill her. Her courage in testifying, despite the immense physical and emotional toll, moved the courtroom. Finally, DeWise took the stand in his own defense. He denied everything, insisting he had been home all night, making soup and sleeping. He claimed his memory of that night was fuzzy, saying he only went to town pump around midnight for beer and recalled little else. Under questioning from his defense attorney, DeWise stayed calm. But when the prosecutor cross-examined him, his demeanor quickly shifted. He snapped back with blunt, single-word denials, growing increasingly defensive and evasive. At one point, DeWise declared, "I have been falsely accused here. I didn't do it." He suggested the real killer was still out there, implying investigators had targeted the wrong man. The jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for barely 2 hours on December 10th, 2019, they delivered a unanimous verdict: guilty of deliberate homicide for Lauren's death, and guilty of attempted deliberate homicide for the vicious attack on Ashley Van Hemert. Courtroom spectators gasped and sobbed the moment that verdict was read aloud. Deputies immediately handcuffed DeWise at the defense table and led him away. Witnesses who had testified about his history of abuse embraced the officers, completely overwhelmed with relief. Chief Deputy County Attorney Eric Kitzmiller later spoke out, praising the immense bravery of the killer's children. He explained that their testimony only happened because they finally broke free from their father's grip and found the courage to speak the truth despite the heavy emotional toll. He also praised Ashley Van Hemmert's incredible recovery and her courage in confronting her attacker. The prosecutor warned that domestic violence cases like this were rising sharply in the Gallatin Valley, and that stepping forward requires massive courage because of the manipulation and control these abusers use. Sentencing was held on February 4th, 2020. Judge Holly Brown handed down a sentence of 220 years without parole. The heavy sentence reflected the utter horror of his crimes, a planned attack designed to silence and kill, where he even forced his own child to participate. DeWise showed zero remorse, claiming he was innocent and that the real killer was still out there. Today, Joseph Paul DeWise is locked away inside the Montana State Prison. His brave children, who risked everything to testify against him, are slowly rebuilding their lives far from his reach. Meanwhile, Ashley Van Hemert continues to heal. Her survival remains a powerful example of strength against absolute horror. Lauren Walder DeWise is remembered as a mother who fought desperately to protect her kids, someone who turned to the law for help, but paid the ultimate price just to escape. Her tragic story is a stark reminder that leaving an abuser is the most dangerous moment, and the systems meant to protect victims often move far too slowly. Meanwhile, in Kalispell, another man was spinning a desperate web of lies, trying to convince a jury that his wife's broken body at the foot of the stairs was just a tragic accident. Case 10. Bradley J. Hillius. When someone dies at the bottom of a staircase, you and I know the first question detectives ask. Was it a tragic fall or something far worse? In December 2020, that very question sparked a massive investigation in Kalispell, Montana, after Amanda Hillius was found unresponsive, her body broken and her life slipping away. Her husband, Bradley Hillius, had his story ready. She fell. It was just a terrible accident. But as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a dark history of abuse, fueled by an affair, and a suspect ready to blame anyone the stairs. His own father, even his dying wife, instead of admitting what he did. Bradley and Amanda Hillius had been living in Kalispell alongside their 4 children and Bradley's father, Scott. On the surface, they seemed like a normal family managing a busy household. But behind that perfect facade, their relationship was highly volatile. In April 2020, Amanda filed for an emergency protection order against both Bradley and Scott, claiming they made her feel unsafe. The court agreed on April 27th, and Bradley immediately filed for divorce. Yet by May, both the court order and the divorce were dismissed as the couple tried to reconcile. That peace was incredibly fragile. Amanda stayed on edge, especially around Scott, whose explosive temper had terrified her in the first place. When deputies served that initial protection order back in April, Scott had threatened them and talked about self-harm, a massive red flag, but it never led to any real help. By December, Amanda was still sharing that house with Bradley, Scott, and their children, trying to keep things together despite the mounting tension. On the morning of December 15th, 2020, Amanda's young son was eating breakfast when shouting erupted from his parents' bedroom. As he later testified, the fight quickly escalated. He heard his father drag his mother off the couch, beating her with both open and closed fists. Bradley ordered the boy to his room. From behind closed doors, the child heard his father drag his mother downstairs. Through the walls, he heard Amanda beg Bradley to stop the beating. Then he heard her scream, "Call 911." Moments later, dispatchers received a call from the house. When Flathead County Sheriff's deputies finally arrived at the home, Scott Hillius pointed them inside the house, where Amanda lay motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Bradley was pretending to help, claiming he heard a scream from his bedroom and rushed out to find her there. He insisted he had no idea what happened, claiming she must have fallen down the stairs. He explained that he quickly took their 3-year-old daughter to his room and set up a tablet, wanting to shield her from seeing the body. Paramedics rushed Amanda to the local hospital with life-threatening injuries, including a deep head wound, a ruptured liver, and broken ribs. indicating a brutal beating that was far worse than any accidental fall. For 4 days, doctors fought desperately to save her life. But on December 19th, Amanda succumbed to her injuries. On December 22nd, a pathologist from the Montana State Crime Lab performed an autopsy, concluding she died from blunt force trauma and neck compression. In plain terms, she had been choked and brutally beaten. Investigators immediately began interviewing Amanda's young children. The heartbreaking stories they told completely destroyed Bradley's alibi. Her son detailed the brutal assault, recalling his mother's screams and the sheer terror of that morning. Their statements painted a horrific picture of intentional domestic violence, not a tragic accident. Detectives soon uncovered that Bradley was having a secret affair with a woman named Riley Adams. Evidence revealed that Adams was already preparing to move in, giving the husband a clear, cold-blooded motive to get Amanda out of the picture. On December 24th, a detective called Bradley, asking if he and his father could come down to the station. Bradley refused, stating he needed to consult an attorney first before talking to them. But hours later, Bradley dialed 911 again to report that his father, Scott, had committed suicide. The timing was deeply suspicious. With police closing in, the only other witness to Amanda's final hours was suddenly dead, leaving Bradley as the only living soul who knew what really happened. Officers arrested him on the spot, charging him with murder. With the murder trial looming, his defense lawyers built a desperate strategy centered on shifting the blame. First, they claimed Amanda merely fell down the stairs, arguing her horrific injuries were just the result of a tragic accident. When physical evidence proved that impossible, they quickly pointed the finger at Scott Hilius's, the deceased father-in-law. They painted Scott as a violent, angry man, reminding the jury that Amanda had feared him. They asked why detectives never fully investigated Scott, calling his sudden death a highly convenient end to the case. The trial began in January 2022 in Flathead County Court, presided over by Judge Robert Allison. Over 10 emotional days, the jury heard from medical experts, forensic specialists, Amanda's children, and Bradley himself. But prosecutors systematically tore those claims apart. They played recorded jailhouse visits between the suspect and his secret mistress, Riley Adams. In one video, Bradley claimed his father had actually confessed to killing Amanda during a private conversation right before he died. But Bradley had kept this shocking confession completely secret from the police, a silence the state used to destroy his credibility while laying out a damning timeline of the crime. Bradley was desperately hiding a secret affair. To him, Amanda was just a squatter blocking his new girlfriend from moving in. He had the motive, the opportunity, and a dark history of domestic violence against her. Even the children confirmed the abuse. Forensics revealed strangulation and blunt force injuries that didn't match a fall. Then came Bradley's shifting stories. First the stairs, then his own father. And finally, claims of emotional distress showed a killer desperately dodging blame. Yet Bradley insisted on testifying, a high-stakes gamble that often ends in disaster. Up on the stand, he lashed out at Amanda, calling her unfaithful. He insisted he was innocent and that investigators had rushed to judgment. His cold testimony drew sharp gasps from the packed courtroom. Prosecutor John Donovan laid out a brutally simple motive. He wanted to get this so-called squatter out to clear the way for his new girlfriend. On January 14th, 2022, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of deliberate homicide. Amanda's family wept with relief. Bradley slumped over the defense table, weeping before being hauled off by the Flathead County Sheriff's Office. His lawyers instantly fought for a new trial, claiming prosecutors made unfair remarks during their closing arguments, that the evidence only supported lesser charges, and that heavy media coverage had tainted the jury pool. Judge Allison threw out the motion for a new trial on March 7th, 2022, finding zero merit in their claims. The very next day, March 8th, Bradley faced sentencing. Amanda's mother, Michelle Wongluck, stepped up to deliver an emotional, tearful statement. She spoke of her own life sentence without her beloved daughter, of raising Amanda's 4 kids, and working to make sure they finally felt safe. She begged for the maximum penalty, while Bradley read a letter, still blaming his own father for the crime. Showing zero remorse, he focused entirely on trying to save his own skin. An unmoved Judge Allison handed him 100 years in Montana State Prison. The judge pointed out that the defense offered no proof to support any lesser charges. Their risky, all-or-nothing strategy of claiming complete innocence had completely collapsed in the end. His lawyers promised to appeal, claiming they were blocked from blaming Scott Hilius's, whose suicide they spun as a confession. But Judge Allison countered that it was actually the defense lawyers who were too terrified to raise that topic in court, dreading that prosecutors would link Bradley to his own father's sudden death. The appeals process dragged on. Finally, in March 2025, the Montana Supreme Court ruled. The murder conviction stood. Justices ruled that while minor procedural slip-ups occurred, they never threatened the overall fairness of the trial or the verdict. Today, Bradley J. Hilius sits behind bars, serving his 100-year prison sentence. Amanda's 4 children are growing up with their grandmother, forever missing the mother who fought to keep them safe. This tragedy proves that domestic abuse often turns fatal the very moment a victim tries to break free, and how vicious abusers will construct wild excuses blaming stairs, their own relatives, or even the victims, rather than facing reality. In Kalispell and across the state, Amanda's memory still echoes deeply, reminding us to protect survivors and ensure that justice never comes too late to save them.